Hello. I don't even know where to begin, so I'm just gonna lay it out. My name's Glenn. I'm 38, and up until a few weeks ago, I thought I had a life most people would envy. A wife I adored, a house we built from scratch, emotionally, not literally, and dreams we shared like kids whispering in forts under blanket tents. My wife Bonnie and I met at a college party 15 years ago. She wasn't the loud, center of attention type. She was sitting on a ratty couch with a solo cup, laughing at a story some guy was telling, but her eyes, God, her eyes were looking somewhere else entirely. Detached, amused, observant. I sat down, struck up a conversation, and before I knew it, we were the ones laughing so hard we cried. I remember walking her home that night. Her hands were buried in her coat pockets, and she said, "You're either a total goofball or the kindest guy I've ever met. I can't figure out which yet." Turns out I was both. We got married when we were 25, broke but happy, renting a one-bedroom apartment with mismatched furniture and an oven that only worked on alternate Tuesdays. We were the type of couple that made spaghetti dinners into celebrations, toasting cheap red wine like we were kings. Bonnie was my best friend, sharp-tongued and ambitious, but also deeply loyal. We weren't perfect, but we were happy. At least that's what I thought. I know what you're thinking. Glenn, were there any signs? Like, real signs? And yeah, if I'm honest, the signs were there, like cracks forming quietly in the walls of a house you're sure is sturdy. The first earthquake, as I call it, hit 2 years ago when I lost my job. I worked in logistics, 12 years. That job was a lifer for me. Steady, decent pay, and I was good at it. Then, one Friday afternoon, the company reorganized, and suddenly my name wasn't on the org chart. They said it wasn't personal, but let me tell you, losing your job feels pretty damn personal when you've given it a third of your life. First, Bonnie was my rock. "We'll be okay," she said, stroking my hair like she used to back in our early days. "You'll find something even better, I promise." For a few months, I really believed her. I applied to dozens of positions, tweaked my resume until my eyes burned, and even considered a total career pivot. Meanwhile, Bonnie worked longer hours at her corporate job, picking up the financial slack. She never said anything cruel outright, but I started to notice subtle changes. The way she'd ask, "Any luck today?" without looking up from her phone, or the way her hugs grew looser, less sincere, like she was distracted. I shrugged it off. I'm an optimist, always have been. Maybe a little naive. My friends have always said I see people the way I want them to be, not as they are. I can't help it. It's how I'm wired. I believed Bonnie was waving metaphorical pom-poms for me, cheering me through this rough patch. But in hindsight, maybe she was just waving red flags. Then the late nights started. I'm not the kind of guy to jump to conclusions. Bonnie had been climbing the corporate ladder for years, and I was proud of her. She was leading some big project that demanded a lot of time and energy. At least that's what she told me. Most nights, she'd come home late, sometimes 9, sometimes 10, carrying takeout and a weariness I hadn't seen before. She'd collapse on the couch, smelling faintly of something that wasn't hers. New cologne, maybe, but I chalked it up to coworkers in close quarters. One night, I joked, "Geez, you spend more time at the office than at home. Should I be worried?" I said it with a smile, thinking it would lighten the mood. But Bonnie didn't laugh. She didn't even look at me. "It's called being responsible, Glenn," she said flatly, stabbing her fork into her salad. Something about that moment stuck with me. The tone, the coldness. The thing is, Bonnie's always been the more serious of the two of us. If I'm the dreamer, she's the planner. We balance each other out, or at least we used to. But after I lost my job, her seriousness turned into something sharper. At dinner, she'd pick at her food while I rambled about some job lead that didn't pan out. Her sighs grew longer, her silences heavier. I started to feel like an annoyance, a burden she carried out of obligation. You know how people say you can tell when someone's fallen out of love with you? I never understood that until now. It's not the big fights or the shouting. It's the absence of things. The way Bonnie stopped asking me about my day. The way she'd kiss my cheek instead of my lips. The way she'd say, "love you" at night without looking at me, like she was checking a box. But this time something was off. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Nothing unusual there. What was unusual, though, was the lock screen. Instead of the usual preview of the message, all I saw was the name J and the word notification. I froze. Bonnie never turned off message previews. I'd seen 100 texts from coworkers and friends pop up without a second thought. Silly jokes, reminders, random memes. She's never been the secretive type. So why now? I stared at the screen longer than I should have, like I expected the message to reveal itself if I glared hard enough. The phone buzzed again. Another notification from Jay. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my thoughts swirling. Bonnie's voice echoed faintly from the bathroom. Shower running, water pounding against tile. And I couldn't shake this strange, sinking feeling that something was very, very wrong. It wasn't proof of anything, but the absence of answers was louder than the phone's buzzing. I didn't know what to make of it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. I've always thought that when you find out your spouse is cheating, it happens like it does in movies. Something dramatic, like catching them in a lie they can't wriggle out of, or finding some glaring clue in a moment of intense suspicion. But that's not what happened. No, my moment wasn't cinematic at all. It was as mundane and forgettable as any other Tuesday. Bonnie had left her laptop open in the kitchen. She'd been rushing out of the room, muttering something about needing to pee after too much coffee, with a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I was sitting at the counter, aimlessly flipping through my phone and waiting for the toast to pop. Her laptop sat a few feet away, its screen glowing softly. It wasn't like I went looking for anything. I swear I didn't. In fact, I only glanced at the laptop because I thought maybe she'd left it unplugged. Bonnie always complained about her battery life, and I figured I'd check to see if she needed her charger. That's when I saw it. It wasn't even a long email. Just one short line glowing at the top of her inbox. The kind of message you'd almost miss if you weren't looking directly at it. Asterisk, you are incredible, Charles. I wish Glenn would just disappear. Asterisk. I didn't understand at first. My brain literally refused to connect the dots, like a child refusing to do a puzzle. I remember blinking, squinting, as if somehow my eyes weren't working properly. I told myself it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe it was out of context, or maybe there was a good explanation. Charles? Who the hell was Charles? Bonnie flushed the toilet down the hall, and I panicked. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the laptop and carried it to the living room, away from the kitchen where she'd left it. I told myself I'd find something, anything, that would make this make sense. The first email I opened was dated weeks ago. It started innocently enough. Asterisk, thank you for all your hard work, Bonnie. Drinks on me after the next meeting? Asterisk. But as I clicked through the thread, it became clear that this wasn't just a professional exchange. With each reply, the tone grew flirtatious. Compliments slipping into jokes, jokes turning into something heavier, darker. There were accidental touches mentioned, secret smiles across conference room tables, plans made under the pretense of work dinners, and then I found it. The chain that shattered whatever hope I was clinging to. Hotel reservations. Under fake names. Emails with meeting times. Bonnie's words sliced through me like paper cuts I couldn't stop. Asterisk, I've never felt so alive. Asterisk. Asterisk, Glenn doesn't understand me the way you do. Asterisk. Asterisk, it's freeing, living a double life. I don't think I can go back. Asterisk. I sat there, hunched over the screen, scrolling like a man possessed. I kept thinking, asterisk, this isn't real. This isn't her. This isn't us, asterisk, but it was. It was right there in black and white. Bonnie wasn't just having an affair. She was telling this man, Charles, things I thought only I knew. Her dreams, her fears, how unhappy she'd been. That was the first moment it hit me. She'd been happy to humiliate me. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes, maybe hours, letting each word chip away at the version of Bonnie I thought I knew. I felt sick, like something inside me had broken loose and was rattling around in my chest. And as much as I wanted to stop reading, I couldn't. It was like watching a train wreck unfold in slow motion. Then came the confirmation of the dinner reservation for that very night. 7:30 p.m. Same hotel as last time. Can't wait to see you again. My love, asterisk asterisk. My love. My wife had called someone else my love. I heard Bonnie's footsteps coming down the hall. I barely managed to close the laptop before she walked into the room. She gave me that distracted smile of hers, the one she'd perfected in the last year, the kind that looked polite but empty, like she'd forgotten how to really see me. "Hey, did you want me to pick up anything for dinner?" she asked casually, pulling her phone from her pocket. "No," I said too quickly. My voice cracked. I'll figure something out." She didn't notice anything was off. Or if she did, she didn't care enough to ask. She just nodded, grabbed her bag, and left for work, just like she did every day. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt like I could finally breathe, though I'm not sure what came out of me could even be called breathing. I sat on the couch, shaking, my head in my hands, replaying the emails over and over in my mind. Charles. Charles was her boss. It all started to make sense. The late nights, the phone turned upside down on the counter, the work trips, the cologne. She hadn't just been distant. She'd been living another life right under my nose, a life where I didn't exist. And the worst part? She didn't just cheat. She enjoyed it. I wish I could tell you I was calm or rational in that moment, but I wasn't. I felt desperate, like someone had yanked the rug out from under me, and I was falling with nothing to grab onto. My mind raced through every possibility. Should I confront her? Should I go to the hotel tonight and catch them? Should I call Charles and tell him to stay away from my wife? Instead, I did nothing. I sat there for hours, spiraling deeper and deeper, unable to stop myself from imagining her with him, laughing, touching, telling him the same sweet things she used to tell me. I wanted to believe there was some part of Bonnie that still loved me, but those emails had shown me something I couldn't unsee. Bonnie was already gone. In the following days, I spiraled even more. I started watching her carefully. I noticed how often she was glued to her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, her face lighting up at messages she'd never let me see. I checked her social media for signs, new friends, posts she'd liked, anything that would confirm the truth I already knew. And then, I followed her. It wasn't planned. I'd just been driving home from an unsuccessful job interview when I saw her car pull into a cafe across town. She wasn't alone. Through the window, I saw her sitting with him, Charles. He was older, slick, the kind of guy who probably never struggled with anything a day in his life. Bonnie was laughing, leaning across the table, her hand brushing his. I didn't go in. I didn't confront her. I just sat in my car, watching my wife smile at a stranger like he was the center of her world. And that's when I knew I wasn't losing her. I'd already lost her. I don't know where to go from here, but I'm tired of pretending everything's okay. Confronting Bonnie wasn't part of the plan. If I'm honest, I didn't even have a plan. I'd spent the whole day stewing in a haze of disbelief and anger, replaying the emails over and over in my mind. I couldn't stop picturing her with Charles, couldn't stop hearing her words. Asterisk, it's freeing, living a double life. Asterisk. By the time evening rolled around, I wasn't thinking clearly. I printed out the emails, every word of her betrayal spelled out in black and white, and sat in the living room, staring at them. I kept telling myself to wait, to sleep on it, to confront her with a clear head. But the longer I sat there, the angrier I got. Bonnie came home just after 9 p.m., humming softly as she unlocked the door. She looked happy, glowing even. She had a takeout bag in one hand and her phone in the other, smiling at something on the screen. "Hey, Glenn," she said brightly, kicking off her heels. I brought Ty. Thought we could. Who's Charles? I cut her off. My voice was quiet, almost calm, but there was a sharpness to it I couldn't hide. Bonnie froze mid-step. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she turned to me with a look of exaggerated confusion. What? You heard me, I said, holding her gaze. Who? Is Charles? Her face shifted again. Shock, anger, and then something that looked like calculation. Finally, she settled on a mask of mild annoyance. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned forward and tossed the printed emails onto the coffee table between us. These, I said. For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes flicked to the papers, and I saw her jaw tighten. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, picked them up, and skimmed the first page. Her expression didn't crumble. It hardened. You've been going through my emails? She said, her voice low and incredulous. That's pathetic, Glenn. Pathetic, that word hit me like a slap. I stood up, my hands balled into fists at my sides. That's all you have to say? Not an explanation, not an apology, just pathetic. She threw the papers back onto the table like they were garbage. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry. Sorry you're so insecure that you feel the need to spy on me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Asterisk insecure asterisk? You're cheating on me. Bonnie, don't turn this around on me. Cheating, she repeated bitterly, crossing her arms. Is that what you think this is? God, Glenn, grow up. Grow up, I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around behind my back with your boss, lying to me, laughing at me, making me look like an idiot. How is that not cheating? Bonnie's mask cracked then, but not the way I expected. She didn't cry or apologize. She got angry, furious. You think I wanted it to be this way? She snapped, her voice dripping with venom. Do you have any idea what it's like to live with you? To watch you sit there day after day, moping, wallowing in self-pity while I'm out there keeping us afloat. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice shaking. Yes, she yelled, throwing her hands in the air. You've been a dead weight, Glenn. I'm tired of carrying you. Tired of pretending everything's fine. Charles makes me feel alive. Glenn. He listens to me, respects me. Things you stopped doing a long time ago. I stared at her, stunned. I wanted to argue, to shout, to deny everything she was saying. But her words hit a nerve I didn't even know I had. I had been struggling, no question. But I'd thought we were struggling together. Bonnie didn't stop there. She laughed bitterly and shook her head. You know what Charles thinks? He thinks I should be honest with you. That I should share the truth. Maybe you should meet him, Glenn. Shake his hand. Thank him for doing what you couldn't. Her words were like ice water poured over me. I stared at her, trying to understand if she was serious. She was. You're saying I should, what? Share you with him? Her smile turned cold, smug. Why not? You're not losing me, Glenn. You're just not enough on your own. Maybe it's time you accept that. Something inside me snapped. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I laughed. A dry, hollow sound that startled even me. You think I'm going to stand here and let you humiliate me like this? I said, shaking my head. You really think I'm just going to roll over and take it? Bonnie blinked, caught off guard by my reaction. What are you? You want to destroy me, Bonnie? I cut her off, stepping closer. Go ahead. Do your worst. But you'll regret it. I promise you, you'll regret it. For the first time all night, she looked uncertain. Her smugness faltered, replaced by something that almost looked like fear. Glenn, don't be dramatic, she said. But her voice lacked the bite it had before. I didn't respond. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not with the version of her that had stood there, tearing me apart piece by piece without so much as a second thought. As I walked into the night, one thought kept circling in my mind, louder than anything else. This isn't over. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur. Though past doesn't feel like the right word. They dragged, heavy and endless, each one pressing down on me with the weight of everything I'd lost. I spent most of my time alone in the house, staring at walls, trying to piece together how everything had gone so horribly wrong. Humiliation was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't just that Bonnie had cheated. It was the way she'd stood there, looking me in the eye, and acted like I should have thanked her for it. The memory of her words, "You're not enough on your own," played on repeat in my head like a cruel mantra, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. I ignored my phone. Friends called, texted, left voicemails, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What would I even say? That my wife was sleeping with her boss? That she'd humiliated me, torn apart everything I thought we had, and somehow had the gall to blame me for it? Nights were the worst. I barely slept. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every moment where I should have seen the truth but didn't. On the rare occasions I did drift off, I'd dream of her, laughing, smiling, her hand on Charles's arm, and I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my chest aching like I'd been punched. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the house top to bottom, rearranged furniture, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind quiet. But no matter how hard I scrubbed or how many times I shifted the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, lingering in every corner like a ghost. Then there were the memories. I'd stumble across little things. An old photo tucked in a drawer, a mug she'd painted for me years ago at one of those DIY ceramic shops. Each one hit me like a gut punch, reminding me of who we used to be, who I thought she still was. I'd sit there, holding the object in my hands, trying to reconcile the Bonnie who laughed with me over burnt spaghetti with the woman who stood in our living room and told me to accept her affair. One afternoon, in a fit of desperation, I decided to purge the house of her. I started in the closet, pulling out anything that reminded me of her. Old clothes, gifts she'd given me, photos from vacations that now felt like cruel jokes. It was while I was cleaning out the top shelf that I found the box. It was small, tucked in the back corner, covered in a thin layer of dust. I didn't recognize it at first, but when I pulled it down and opened the lid, I realized it was a collection of Bonnie's old diaries. I almost put them back. Reading them felt like an invasion of privacy, even after everything she'd done. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I sat down on the floor, flipping through the first one, skimming the entries for anything that might help me understand what had happened to her, to us. At first, they were just fragments of the woman I used to know. Entries about our early days, her excitement over a promotion, fears about buying our first house. But as I moved further into the diaries, something shifted. She wrote about insecurities I never knew she had. Fears of financial instability, self-doubt about her body, little comments about feeling not good enough or too much all at once. And then, about 3 years ago, a name started popping up. Charles. Charles says I need to take control of my life. Charles is the only one who believes in me. I owe Charles so much for the opportunities he's given me. But sometimes he scares me. I stopped breathing when I read that last line. The entries grew darker after that. She talked about how much pressure Charles was putting on her, how he'd started making personal comments about her appearance, about me. Charles says Glenn is holding me back. He doesn't understand what it's like to feel trapped. Charles says I need to stop asking for permission and start doing what I want. But what if I don't know what I want? And then, a few months ago, Charles kissed me today. I didn't stop him. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Charles says he'll take care of everything, but I'm scared. Scared of losing him. Scared of losing Glenn. Scared of losing myself. Asterisk. I closed the diary and sat there, stunned. This wasn't the Bonnie I knew. This wasn't the confident, ambitious woman I'd fallen in love with. This was someone who'd been manipulated, pushed into a corner by a man who saw her vulnerabilities and exploited them for his own gain. Charles hadn't just been her lover. He'd been pulling her strings, feeding her doubts, convincing her that I was the enemy, that she couldn't survive without him. The anger I'd been holding on to for days began to shift, replaced by something more complicated. I still felt betrayed, how could I not? But now there was something else. Pity, maybe, or sadness. For the first time, I wondered if Bonnie had ever truly been happy with him, or if she'd been too afraid to leave, too tangled up in his web to see another way out. I don't know what to do with this information yet. Part of me wants to confront her again, to throw the diaries in her face and demand answers. Another part of me wonders if it's even worth it. What I do know is this: Charles didn't just take my wife. He took the woman I loved and turned her into someone I don't recognize. And now I'm left here, trying to figure out what's real and what's just another one of his lies. The next confrontation wasn't planned. But by this point, I had stopped trying to plan anything. My life had unraveled in ways I could never have anticipated, and I was operating on instinct, piecing together fragments of truth I didn't want but couldn't ignore. I had spent days poring over Bonnie's diaries. The entries haunted me, each one painting a picture of a woman I didn't recognize, caught in a web of insecurity, manipulation, and fear. The man at the center of it all, Charles, wasn't just her boss. He wasn't just her lover. He was a predator, someone who'd seen her vulnerabilities and used them against her. That evening, when Bonnie came home from work, I was waiting for her in the living room. I wasn't clutching printed emails this time. I had the diaries in my lap, open to the passages where she'd written about Charles. She walked in, her heels clicking on the floor, her face set in that mask of cold detachment I'd grown so used to. "What now?" she asked, sighing like I was an inconvenience. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. Instead, I held up the diary and said quietly, "He's controlling you, Bonnie." "I know it." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I flipped to one of the entries and read it aloud. Asterisk, Charles says I need to stop asking for permission and start doing what I want. But what if I don't know what I want? Asterisk. She froze, the color draining from her face for just a moment before she recovered. "That's private," she snapped. "You had no right to read that." I ignored her. "He's been feeding you these ideas, making you doubt yourself, doubt me, isolating you from everyone who cares about you. This isn't just an affair, Bonnie. He's been manipulating you." She laughed, but it was hollow, forced. "You don't know what you're talking about. Charles has done more for me than you ever have." "Really?" I said, standing now. "That's why you wrote this?" I read another entry aloud. Asterisk, "I owe him so much for the opportunities he's given me, but sometimes he scares me." Asterisk. For the first time, her mask cracked. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and her eyes darted away from mine. "You don't understand," she muttered. "Then explain it to me," I pressed. "Explain why you stayed with someone who scared you. Explain why you chose him over me." She didn't answer, but I saw something flash across her face. Fear? Shame? Maybe both. It hit me then how deep Charles's hold on her went. This wasn't just about her choices or her betrayal. This was about a man who'd used his position, his power, to twist her into someone she wasn't. But knowing that didn't erase what she'd done to me. "I'm leaving, Bonnie," I said finally. The words felt heavy, final, but they also felt right. "I can't do this anymore. I deserve better than this." Her head snapped up, and for a second, I thought I saw panic in her eyes. "So that's it," she said, her voice shaking. "You're just walking away?" "You already walked away," I replied quietly. "I'm just catching up." The divorce was the easy part, at least on paper. I moved out the next day, staying with a friend while I sorted out the logistics. Bonnie didn't fight me on it. If anything, she seemed resigned, like she knew this was inevitable. But I couldn't just walk away from Charles. Over the next few weeks, I started digging. I found old colleagues of Bonnie's who had stories of their own about Charles. His mentorship of young women, his habit of crossing lines in the workplace. I even uncovered whispers of financial misconduct, shady deals he'd orchestrated to line his own pockets. I gathered everything I could, emails, testimonies, anonymous tips, and sent it all to his company's board of directors. I didn't include my name. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted to stop him. It didn't take long for the house of cards to fall. Within weeks, Charles was placed on leave pending an internal investigation. By the end of the month, he'd been forced to resign. The scandal made headlines, allegations of harassment, abuse of power, and financial fraud. His reputation was ruined. It should have felt like a victory, but all I felt was exhaustion. Then, one evening, Bonnie showed up at my door. She looked nothing like the woman who'd stood in our living room weeks ago, smug and unyielding. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes red from crying. She clutched her purse tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I didn't know how to get away from him," she said, her voice breaking. He made me feel like I didn't have a choice, like I owed him everything. "I'm so sorry, Glenn, for everything. I was scared, and I didn't know how to tell you." Her words should have meant something, but they didn't. I stood in the doorway, staring at her, feeling nothing but a deep, hollow sadness. "You could have told me," I said finally. My voice was quiet, steady. "You didn't have to destroy me to save yourself." She started to cry, but I didn't comfort her. Couldn't. Whatever we'd had, whatever we'd been, it was gone. "You need help, Bonnie," I said. "But I can't be the one to give it to you." I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Not happy, not healed, but free. Bonnie's story with Charles was over, and so was mine. Moving forward hasn't been easy. Some days are harder than others. But I've started therapy, something I should have done long ago, and I'm beginning to rebuild. It's slow, painful work, but it's mine. As for Bonnie, I don't know where she is now. I hope she's getting the help she needs. I don't hate her anymore. I don't feel much of anything for her, really. And maybe that's the biggest step toward healing I've taken yet. The divorce was quiet. No shouting, no drawn-out arguments. Just two people signing papers in a room that felt colder than it should have. Bonnie didn't fight for anything. Didn't ask for the house, didn't argue over the car. Maybe she didn't care anymore, or maybe she just felt guilty. I don't know. I didn't ask. Afterward, I moved into a small apartment across town. It's nothing special. One bedroom, outdated kitchen, noisy neighbors, but it's mine. I filled it with secondhand furniture, a cheap TV, and a few houseplants I'm trying not to kill. It's not much, but it feels like a fresh start. Some days, when the silence is heavy, I still catch myself reaching for my phone to text Bonnie, to share some stupid joke or piece of news. Old habits die hard. But then I remember who she's become, or maybe who she always was, and I stop. I don't hate Bonnie anymore. I did for a while. Hate burned in my chest like acid, eating away at me, leaving me empty. But over time, it softened into something else. Pity. Bonnie was broken, and I think Charles saw that and used it to his advantage. Maybe she didn't know how to fight back, or maybe she was just too afraid to try. But here's the thing I've learned. Broken people break others. Bonnie and I were both hurting, but we hurt each other in different ways. I let my own failures, losing my job, my confidence, turn me into someone I barely recognized. I was drowning in silence, too proud or too afraid to admit I was struggling. Bonnie, on the other hand, lashed out. She found someone who made her feel powerful, even if it cost her everything else. That's the hardest part about betrayal. It teaches you things you don't want to learn, about the people you love and about yourself. I spent too long thinking I wasn't enough because Bonnie told me I wasn't. But I see now that her words had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her. That's what manipulation does. It distorts reality until you forget who you are, until you accept things you never should. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone reading this, it's this. Speak up before you drown in silence if you feel like someone is pulling you under. Whether it's a partner, a boss, or even your own insecurities, don't let it consume you. Don't let it convince you that you're not worthy of love, respect, or happiness. Because you are. I promise you, you are. It's been months since the divorce, and life is slowly starting to make sense again. I finally landed a new job. A good one. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me something to focus on. I've started seeing my friends again, people I pushed away when everything fell apart. They never judged me, never asked for explanations I wasn't ready to give. They just showed up, offering beers and bad jokes and reminders that life doesn't stop when your heart breaks. One night, we all ended up at a bar downtown, crammed into a sticky booth, laughing about some inside joke I don't even remember. The bartender slid a round of drinks across the table, and one of my friends raised his glass. To fresh starts, he said, grinning at me. I smiled back, holding up my own glass. To fresh starts. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Light. The weight in my chest wasn't gone completely, but it was smaller now, more manageable. When I got home that night, I dropped my keys on the counter and found the job offer I'd printed earlier sitting by the door. I picked it up, reading over the words for what felt like the 100th time. It wasn't just a new job, it was a second chance. I think about Bonnie sometimes. I wonder where she is, whether she's still trying to untangle herself from the mess Charles left behind. I hope she finds peace. I really do. But I'm not waiting for her anymore, because I'm free, wiser, stronger, and ready to start over. Some betrayals shatter you. Others build you into something new. This one did both. And for the first time in a long time, I'm okay with that. To anyone who's made it this far, thank you for listening. If you're going through something similar, I hope you know it gets better. It's messy and painful, and sometimes it feels impossible, but it does get better. Life doesn't end when someone breaks your heart. Sometimes that's just where the story really begins. Bye.